So it's a great pleasure to welcome to our 2020 Online Trend Summit one of the hottest chefs in London right now to share with us her passion for plant-based cooking, for seasonality, local sourcing and sustainability, as well as her motivations for her new hyper-seasonal pop-up. Chantelle Nicholson, welcome to the Food People 2020 Online Trend Summit. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Can we just start by, setting the scene for us? Where are you? Where are you speaking to us from? Yeah, what's the day job?
Okay, so I am actually at my new pop-up, which is called All's Well in Hackney. We opened just over 2 weeks ago, just under 2 weeks ago, actually. So we had about 5 days of 6 days of 5 days of service before Tier 4 kicked in.
Yeah.
So we are opening tomorrow as a shop and takeaway, and doing deliveries from here as well. It's a neighbourhood community, so I think hopefully things will go quite well here.
And I assume with a plan to switch back into service as normal once early December. Is that the plan?
Fingers are crossed that it will be early December. Yes.
Indeed, certainly mine are. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Just building on that, then thinking about, and it might be that you want to think about both Tredwells and also All's Well, but can you just describe for us a bit about your kind of food philosophy, your food agenda in those two locations? Just kind of bring that to life for us a little bit.
Sure. I think for me, one of my biggest passions is vegetables. I think that stems from growing up in New Zealand, where I was surrounded by beautiful, delicious produce, and it was just part and parcel of my life, really, of my childhood. Yeah. And it's only on reflection that I kind of see how privileged I was to have that upbringing. So they've always been a passion of mine. I think I've become more passionate about them probably in the last 3 to 4 years. And both Tredwells and All's Well, the menu is probably about 60 to 70% plant-based. I'm very careful to use the term plant-based rather than vegan. Yeah. Because to me, veganism is a lifestyle choice, whereas plant-based talks about what's on the plate. And I'm not plant-based myself, but I feel that obviously we all need to eat a lot more plants, both for the planetary health and for our own health, for biodiversity, all that sort of good stuff moving forward. So very veg-centric, I would say, both restaurants. Try and source as locally as possible. I have 2 deliveries a week that come in from small organic biodynamic farmers in Kent. So really, and the produce just you can taste the difference. It's a lot more expensive, but you can actually taste the difference. Very much a philosophy on zero waste and trying to use up as much as possible, and trying to also, I guess, cook as sustainably as possible and actually run a restaurant as sustainably as possible.
And how do those things, particularly around sourcing, and you talked about zero waste there, how does that actually impact on what you do kind of day to day? Because it's a positive choice, but it's not an easy choice.
Yeah, I would agree. It does it can add a few more layers into a workload. I think, traditionally, and the way I used to work was you'd devise your menu and then you would order everything for that menu. And yes, it was seasonal, but it wasn't hyper seasonal, which is the way I like to work now. Where possible, it was very much about, okay, I want to put this dish on the menu because these things are in season at that point in time. Now it's slightly working the opposite way around and saying, actually, what can I get from my suppliers? What's on this list that I get twice a week? How can I then integrate that into a dish to put on the menu? So it's somewhat working backwards. Yeah. Obviously, some of the staples are still around, and some things aren't necessarily seasonal. You look at butter and oil. Try to use as much British produce as possible, but I do make a few exceptions for things like olive oil and citrus as well.
Yeah. When you say you kind of work backwards, that really brings to life, certainly for me, the difference between seasonal and hyper seasonal. But how does that kind of integrate with what you do? Have you got kind of conversations going on with farmers and growers that keep that conversation going continually, so you know what's available? I mean, years ago when I was a chef, it was about ordering off a list. So how is that different in the way that you work?
So I think I'm kind of aware of when things should be about to come into season, and I think that dialogue with especially now that I have with the farmers, is finding out what do they have, and I get sent a list twice a week of what actually is in the fields to harvest. I then order off that list, it gets harvested, and then it comes to me literally the next day. So everything is, uber fresh, as well as being completely local, sustainable, grown in a really great way. I also speak to them about if there's anything that's kind of surplus or potentially going to waste. So I had a kind of massive crate of wonky cucumbers just last week, actually, and obviously going to preserve those to be able to use moving forward. So trying to really support the farmers, as well as ordering what I need. It's also saying, what do you have that I could potentially use, that surplus, that potentially may kind of go to waste or to ground cover.
And have you sort of embarked on any projects with any growers to perhaps bring back or to feature any heritage varieties, or bring back anything from the past, or even to try and preserve something that maybe isn't grown so much? Are those conversations that you're having as well?
They're definitely in the early stages, and I think it's very much about what's possible and what's feasible, because I think that generally differs from kind of, I guess, site to site, and also what the farmer is interested in and what's possible. So I think I also work with a farm in Wiltshire, where I get my lamb from. It's pasture-fed organic lamb. I've been to visit them. They're great people, and I just feel really, for me, that's the kind of meat I want to buy. Obviously, we don't have a huge amount of meat on the menu, but everything I do have, I want it to be the best in terms of where it comes from, how it's sourced, how it's reared, and then how it also gets to me as well.
How do you kind of, I suppose, tread that line between, we talked about being plant-centric. How do you, what kind of gauge or measure do you use? Because is meat used as more of a garnish, or is it, how do you, when you do use meat, how do you use it on the plate? What's your kind of approach to that?
I guess for me, it's either using cuts of meat that aren't particularly popular necessarily, which means that then there is a surplus of that meat. So if I can then take it off the farmer's hands. So I've got lamb ribs on the menu here. Nice. And then we use all the trim from that to make a toasty. So it's kind of using that 360. We render the fat down, which we fry the toasties in. So it's that 360 way of actually working. And obviously any fish is sustainable as well, which does limit it quite considerably. But for me, that's important that we function in that way. And so for me, it kind of depends on the dish, really, as to whether it's kind of the hero or whether it's a garnish. I think for me, meat dishes are generally, I guess, meaty, if that makes sense, rather than using meat in vegetable dishes. Because for me, if people want a purely kind of vegetable dish, they'll get something that's plant-based. So then anything meaty is a bit more meaty. Yeah,
okay. And you talked about sort of very much being inspired by your childhood and growing up in New Zealand. Are there any particular moments or stories or occasions where it really sticks in your mind to say, now on reflection, that was something that I've taken inspiration from? Can you call on anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably loads. We always had a garden when I was growing up, a vegetable garden. So we would literally pop out to the garden before dinner and snip off some salad leaves or pull some carrots up, dig some potatoes. All my extended family were hugely into gardening, and I had an aunt and uncle that had a stone fruit orchard in central Otago, which is a really beautiful part of the world, now famous for wine growing.
Indeed.
And my uncle used to wear these, kind of farm blue overalls, and he obviously rode a motorbike. So you'd hear him pulling up at the end of the day, and he'd come in with these bulging pockets of all these new varieties of things that he was growing. Amazing. And it just, the flavour. I feel a bit sorry for people that haven't had one of his apricots, because the apricots that you can buy in the UK they're just chalk and cheese. And so if that's someone's experience of an apricot, was this kind of squash ball sour little thing, it's not a true representation of how good they can be. And actually eating fruit, directly off the tree, kind of sun warmed, is just, kind of a very, very different experience.
And is that your reference point then when you're sourcing, when you're working with farmers now in your two locations that you're striving to try and get that and then deliver that to a paying customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, it's, my uncle used to grow, just the flavors of his vegetables were insane. I've never had a potato like his, and we would literally dig them up just before dinner, just wash them and boil them, and they were just so delicious. And for me, it's about enhancing that flavor. So I've got a carrot dish on the menu here at Allswell, and it's a wonky carrot that I get from Kent, and it probably is about four times the price of the ones that I would get, which we call donkey carrots. So I shouldn't for donkeys. So, but the flavor is insane, and I think that's, for me, I'm willing to pay that extra money because the flavor it's what a carrot should taste like, and all I need to kind of do is roast it at a really high heat, and it just has this most insane sweetness, and people are kind of blown away by the fact that it's just a carrot. But I think that's we've kind of lost sight of vegetables actually tasting like they're supposed to taste, and obviously yields kind of taken over in a lot of instances. So we've kind of lost the ability to really have that flavor. And I think people have kind of, I guess, rekindled it with meat, and in the last probably kind of 10 years of that really great quality meat, and you can actually taste the difference. Whereas I think we've still got a way to go with vegetables.
What in your view are the kind of building blocks, I suppose? Because you're speaking so passionately there about the flavour of that carrot. Going back, what are the things for you that make that difference in flavour? Is it is it the soil? Is it the variety? Is it what are those kind of building blocks in your view as a cook, as a chef?
I mean, as a chef, obviously, I'm not a kind of agro tech
No, I know you're not an economist. Fine.
But for me, I think the soil has a huge part to play in it, and I think also the fact that it's kind of left to grow in its own environment rather than being forced at speed to grow, so it loses out on that kind of flavour because it hasn't had that time to develop and grow. It's kind of grown really quickly, and it doesn't have a chance to develop that flavour. That's kind of my humble opinion, and obviously I'm sure there's a lot more science involved in it, but we've seen recently that soil health is key, and I think that the crop rotation and biodiversity is also hugely important. And it's about, I guess, these farms, that's where it's obviously they're doing something right, because the flavour is very noticeably different.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Do you think that this style of cooking, plant-centric, plant-biased, do you think it has an even greater relevance in this, not so much lockdown, but this sort of broader era of, it's a pandemic era that we're in and are going to, despite vaccines and so on, are going to be in for, quite some time. Do you think it has a greater relevance today than perhaps it did?
I would hope so. I would hope that people value food a lot more than they did 6 months ago, because when they couldn't get it in the first lockdown, I think there was a greater value placed on it. And I was really, I guess, inspired and happy to see that kind of the ancient grain suppliers like Codmy Dodds, the people that grow amazing wheat to make flour with Gilchesters, they were absolutely kind of sold out on a weekly basis. And for me, that kind of gave a little bit of hope that those things were being, I guess, rediscovered and also being valued for the fact that they could bring something really great to the table versus, what was available in supermarkets or online. I think it really did show a difference in that. So I do hope that continues. I think also from a cost perspective, vegetables are cheaper. They're cheaper than meat. So if you can have kind of 5 veggie-based meals a week, and 2 meat-based, you will see the difference. And I think all of us probably a little bit more conscious of costs and inputs and outputs right now. So I think that also can pave a way for an opportunity for veg to be a bit more to feature better in people's diets at home.
Yeah. And cost is obviously one motivation, whether that be as a home cook or indeed working in industry. What for you are the other motivations? So we've talked about your childhood experiences. Cost is clearly another one. What are those other kind of motivations for you that push you more towards plant-based cooking?
I think for me, I love vegetables. I literally do love them. So I think that's probably easy for me to actually want to eat a lot of them. But I think also looking at a bigger picture, it is, planetary health. I think looking at biodiversity of crops is also really important. Championing things that used to be kind of championed years ago. I feel like I've come a bit full circle myself as well, looking at things that my grandmothers both used to do and finding myself doing them now and thinking that's so ironic that when I was little, I kind of thought, why is she doing that? Like, why is she rinsing her plastic bags? And why is she saving all her vegetable scraps? And now that's exactly what I do. So it's kind of ironic that it's come full circle. And I think that, in terms of actually looking at that 360, it is that whole approach. It's, minimizing the single-use plastics. It's maximizing how we use things. It's minimizing waste in any way, shape, or form. And I guess, in that sense, to look at it in a broader perspective, it's almost moving. It's that notion of a circular economy, reusing, repurposing. As little waste as possible. And that's where we need to be going to be able to sustain a planet moving forward. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Do you feel that cooking with plants gives you a greater or different canvas for creativity compared to a world? And I ask this because I've talked to many chefs about this in the past, and there's definitely a theme to the answer. And I'm really curious from your point of view about does it give you a greater freedom perhaps than some of the rules and formalities around cooking when you've got meat as being the center point of a particular dish?
I think it gives a huge amount of scope. Some people may not see that as freedom because people that are kind of inherently focused on meat, I think sometimes it's difficult for them to kind of see past that at times and to see something else that could be the hero of the dish. But I think if you look at how many, even just from a functional, kind of practical perspective, there's kind of a finite amount of different types of meat, really, and it's much smaller than plants. If you're looking at grains, if you're looking at everything from that, it's kind of probably, I wouldn't even hazard a guess, but, kind of 5 times the amount of things that you have to start with. And I think there's also, meat can be quite restrictive. It can be quite tricky. Obviously, it's, expensive to experiment with in a kitchen. If something goes wrong, it's quite hard to then, you can't really fix it. It's kind of, that's it. If you've overcooked a steak, then you can't it's gone, exactly. So I think vegetables can be a little bit more forgiving. They're also sometimes a bit quicker to cook. So I think you get a bit more scope during service to do things to order or a la menu. I think it's, there is a huge scope with them. And I think for me, I feel more comfortable with vegetables as well because I know them better. I've kind of, I've worked with them a long time of my life. Whereas if you look at kind of quite, niche or special meat that maybe you've only cooked kind of a handful of times, you're not quite as in control of that as you would be with, for instance, a carrot or a cauliflower that's been something that's been with you your whole life and that you can experiment with because, it kind of costs you £2, not £22. So I think there's a huge amount more scope personally.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. What would your advice be for either a chef or indeed a home cook looking to shift towards more of a plant-based diet? Thinking beyond some of the barriers, what would your advice be to them?
I think one of the not errors, but I think the approach needs to be the same approach that you would take with meat. That would be my kind of advice as someone that cooks, with both. And I think that's what people have commented on when they have eaten in the plant-based dishes at the restaurants is, I guess, the depth of flavour. And you can get a depth of flavour with a vegetable. You just need to approach it in the same way that you would a piece of meat. And I always give the analogy that you wouldn't steam a steak and eat it because it would be revolting. Yet we think nothing of steaming cauliflower or broccoli and eating it or even expecting children to eat it when there's actually kind of pretty much not a huge amount of pleasure in eating that. So I think those, that high heat, caramelization, char grilling, approaching it in the same way that you would if it was, a piece of meat or fish is a good way to start to, I guess, think differently about vegetables. Yeah.
So boiling and steaming off the techniques list, but think of this. Some of the things, perhaps even barbecuing and fire cooking and those types of things as well. I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What would your sort of hope for the future be, thinking about how consumers and chefs and the wider industry adopt the shift towards plant-based? What do you hope that future horizon brings?
I think for me, it's about, I would never want kind of meat to be eradicated, because I think there's a huge amount of culture and a huge amount of livelihood involved in it. And, it is delicious. Let's face it. So I think just moving to a shift where it's kind of seen as a treat versus a kind of everyday. I think the removal of factory farms, of, kind of really poor animal welfare needs to go. So, and I think for me, the true cost of food is paid as well, because I think a lot of food is too cheap. And, food that is not particularly nutritious or not particularly well grown or produced is too cheap. So I think it's about actually the things that are really important, kind of more of a plant-based in terms of whole foods is really kind of championed and taken on board, and farmers are given, there's a huge amount of work in, all sorts of farming, both types. And I think it's really important that is recognised and valued, because otherwise we're kind of going to lose it in some respects. So I think, my hope is that vegetables are really appreciated, and the kind of work that goes into them and getting them, to the store or your plate is valued, and that we can also get to a point where, we are actually slowing down on the kind of destruction that we're doing. Obviously, it's going to take a long time to be able to reverse it, but I think just to slow it down is where we need to get to.
And I suppose, and you've started to touch on it there. Actually, what would be your fear if we don't, as a food consuming public? What's your fear if we don't do that?
I think we'll lose we've already lost a huge amount of biodiversity. We'll lose the range of produce that we can actually is actually available to us. So there'll be a lot of things that we potentially enjoy now that we won't be able to in kind of 5 or 10 years potentially, which would be a huge loss. And also that things would just kind of become to a point that actually it could be dangerous for us to even go outside. It could be all sorts of things that actually, I think our quality of life could be just completely diminished pretty rapidly unless things change.
And do you feel that there is a sea change, that there is a shift and a momentum building behind this now, compared to perhaps when you were starting to move this way, say 3 or 4 years ago?
I think there's definitely a lot more chat about it. In terms of actual facts, I think, I don't know, I mean, COVID kind of went one way and then went the other way, I think, in terms of actually improving things. So I think there is a lot of chat, and people are a lot more conscious about it. Whether that actually translates into action, I'm not entirely sure, but I do hope that momentum will carry it all forward, and we'll get onto more of a positive trajectory moving forward.
I guess part of the momentum for you is where you're sitting now, which is Allswell. Can you versus Tredwells? Can you just tell us a bit more about Allswell and what's that pop-up is all about, and what you're trying to achieve?
Sure. So I guess the impetus came from obviously Tredwells is based in Covent Garden, so we've had kind of a triple whammy effect of no tourists, no theatre goers, and no office workers, also no shoppers. So it kind of became a bit of a ghost town. And for me, it was a pretty kind of tough thing to realise and also to experience, because, I had a team of people that were really willing and able to work, but actually the work wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the creative side of having a restaurant and functioning a living, breathing thing was diminishing. So we had an idea that actually, neighbourhoods, for me, it was like neighbourhoods are the place to be, because actually there is a community, people are staying within their neighbourhood, they're going out, they're enjoying, they're supporting. And so it was more a case of, well, actually, how can we be part of a neighbourhood, really quickly? And, we found the site, I think we looked the other day, it was about 2 months ago, just over 2 months ago. And it was kind of I kind of hummed and hawed a bit as to whether or not to do it, and what was the risk. And whilst there was a risk from a business financial sense, for me the risk of not doing it was greater, because just emotionally it was something that could get us all thinking positively. It also meant that I could kind of split the team in half. So there was enough work for the guys in Covent Garden. There was enough work for people here in Hackney. Yeah. So it kind of made sense. And I did think, I had in the back of my mind that another lockdown may happen.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, actually in this location, there's potential for it to be able to, I guess that dreaded word, pivot into a shop, takeaway, delivery. So we start that tomorrow. So for me, it was kind of, as a temporary thing, it's a 6-month lease. So the risk was pretty minimal. A lot of stuff was here. Yeah. We spent a lot of time on eBay and Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace, and got a lot of stuff secondhand. So financially, it was a lot better. But also for me, in terms of what I wanted to achieve in principle, was the fact that we didn't really need to get anything new. We could repurpose things. So we got the keys on the 19th of October, and we opened 10 days later to the public. So it was a bit of a sprint to the finish, but
absolutely,
I think it was something that gave us all something, positive to think about, which at that time, I certainly needed hugely. And I think for me, I guess it's kind of become a bit full circle, because I'm actually, back in the kitchen, in a very small kitchen, cooking. Yeah. So I've kind of come back to the reason I got into this industry in the first place, which was my love, my passion for cooking and food. So in a way, it's kind of brought me full circle. So my own kind of circular economy in some senses. And I think it's been great. It's given other people, within the team a different perspective, a different opportunity. It's created a real, I guess, that team spirit that was kind of wavering when you're all not there together all the time. So it's really created something positive, and hopefully we can just keep it going throughout this lockdown to be able to kind of cover the costs, to be able to keep going and serve our takeaways and everything else.
And do you already feel a sense of being closer to a community in this location? And I appreciate you haven't been there very long, but I've spoken to quite a few chefs over the last few months, and there's a common theme, I think, about connecting with the immediate locality and those that are in it and live and work within it, as opposed to, you made the analogy yourself about Covent Garden, where there's perhaps more, of course you have a local clientele as well, but there's perhaps more transiency, this kind of connection with local community. Does that resonate with you?
Hugely. And that's the reason why also, for me, I was at the beginning, pre-COVID, I was wanting to get into more of a community. And I think, if you look at the neighbourhood here versus the neighbourhood in Covent Garden, there isn't really a community in Covent Garden because, the residents are minimal. There's no kind of, that sense of neighbourhood it's there from, I guess, more of a commercial perspective, but in terms of an actual, people to people. And I think we've already found it, really refreshing being in an area that, we know our neighbours, they come and talk to us. People came and wished us well on our first day, and it was just really that sense of actually this is kind of the reason why restaurants should exist, is that to be able to, be that neighbourhood spot that people can come to, that they can enjoy, that, we get to know their names, all those kind of things. Again, that full circle of what places like this used to be, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you can tell just by the way you're talking about it and your level of excitement, and I'm sure that's shared by the local residents and your team as well. It's really, really exciting, and everybody that's watching, and all of us at the Food People, wish you all the best of luck with that. We hope it goes really well, and that launch of delivery goes really well tomorrow. Over your left shoulder, you've got your book there planted. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that and what that is all about?
Sure. So that was actually published, over 2 years ago now. It is plant-based. It actually stemmed from, I guess I wrote it probably 4 years ago now. Started writing it 3 or 4 years ago. And it was kind of before this big explosion of plant-based food. And for me, I wrote it because I wanted to cook more plant-based food in the restaurant. But when I actually looked for resources in terms of recipe books, etc., I found it really hard to find books that were written, I guess, by people that had, a bit of experience. There were a lot of, I guess, domestic books out there which were, some of them were a little bit questionable in terms of what recipes they offered. So for me, I thought, well, if I can create something that, I'm creating all these recipes, developing all these recipes for myself. Actually, if I can share those and create a resource for everybody else, then hopefully that will help others as well.
No, brilliant. And one last question: you've talked passionately about carrots and cauliflower. What's the vegetable of the or the plant of the moment that you're getting super excited about?
So I think probably Brussels sprouts, which
Of course,
are,
of course.
they're kind of a Marmite thing, aren't they? You love them or you hate them.
Yeah, love them.
But we've got deep fried Brussels sprouts on the menu here
Nice.
which I spray with this delicious vermouth vinegar, and it's kind of converted those people that don't like sprouts into sprout lovers. So we are doing those as a takeaway from tomorrow. So you can come and get a nice little hot box of crispy sprouts
That
to
sounds
take
amazing.
away. Yeah, they're super delicious.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Chantelle, thank you so much for that insight into your personal and professional motivations behind plant-based cooking, seasonality, local sourcing and sustainability. Once again, a great pleasure to welcome you as a speaker to our 2020 online trend summit in a new format this year. Thanks again, Chantelle, on behalf of everyone that's watching and all of us at the Pig People. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.